This past Simchat Torah will go down in infamy. The day in which we celebrate the Torah of God's Malchut, and we rejoice in the love he showed for us by giving us his Torah, became a nightmare for the Jewish state as we were relentlessly attacked by Hamas. October 7th will now be a day that will forever be associated with the deadliest attack on Israel. In addition to the over 1,200 Israelis who were murdered that day by Hamas, hundreds of men, women, and children were also taken into captivity. Israel has named this war the Simchat Torah War. Now, Hamas has also given this war a name. They've named it the Tufan al-Aqsa, which means Al-Aqsa flood. Al-Aqsa refers to the Temple Mount. And this is not some coincidence. The day of the attack and the naming of it were carefully chosen by the enemy to send a message. This is a holy war and a direct attack on the two pillars of Jewish life, the Torah and the temple. As the attack went on that day, we felt like we were in a daze. Instead of the streets being filled with joyous Torah processionals and the sounds of men reading from the Torah, they were filled with the sounds of air raid sirens and Iron Dome interceptions. After we left our bomb shelter, I went outside to see the Torah scrolls being taken from the synagogues and being put into the homes of people, as all major gatherings were now canceled due to more rocket threats. And I walked to my parents' house to make sure that my family was okay. I saw young men running out of their homes in IDF uniforms on a holiday, signifying that the state of Israel was officially in a state of all-out war for the first time in 50 years. Over the next few days, the magnitude of the attack began to sink in. The reality that there was not a single Israeli who was not somehow connected to, or at least one person removed from a victim of the attack. We went into a state of national shock, grief, and mourning. The lamentation of Jeremiah the prophet, "For these things I weep, my eye runs constantly with water," became a bitter reality for us as a nation. And the first week after the attack was tense beyond anything I'd ever experienced in Israel before. The streets of Jerusalem, which normally hustle and bustle with life and traffic and children, were dead silent. And the only thing we could hear were the roaring fighter jets on their way to Gaza. And by that Friday, after the attack, the government officially decided to conduct a full-scale ground invasion of Gaza. Now, the impact of that decision on the lives of Israelis might be lost on those who do not live in Israel. We're a very small country, and as a small country, a ground invasion would mean that everyone in Israel would either have a family member or a close friend who are now going into an active war zone. That Friday, as the troops were massing around Gaza, we made Kiddush as the ground and the windows of our homes, yes, even in Jerusalem, vibrated and shook from the relentless bombardment of the IDF on Gaza. The IDF Chief of Staff, Yoav Gallant, fulfilled his promise to make the ground of Gaza shake. The following days after the ground invasion was approved by the Israeli government, we learned that this attack was not just some Hamas renegade operation. This was a carefully orchestrated attack by Iran through its military proxy, Hamas. Now, the reality of Iran being behind this attack made us realize very, very quickly that Hamas's desire of Jewish genocide was aided that day by a powerful ally in the Middle East. This was Iran's attempt at fulfilling Haman's plan in the days of Queen Esther and Mordecai to eradicate the Jews. Hamas, they did the dirty work, but the planning, training, and financing for the attack all came directly from Iran. Iran wanted to drag the entire Middle East into this conflict to finally destroy, God forbid, the Jewish state. To deter this from becoming a reality, the United States sent their mighty naval fleet, Strike Group 12, to the Mediterranean to deter Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy in Lebanon, and they also conducted missile strikes against the Houthim, or the Huthites, in Yemen, yet another Iranian proxy. It is difficult to look at all of the horror and destruction of this war and not think that we are living in the generation that will see the great war of Gog and Magog, and that we could see the fulfillment of Hashem's words against Gog from the land of Magog, as he spoke through Ezekiel the prophet. Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. Behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out and all of your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great host, all of them with buckler and shield, wielding swords. Persia, Cuth, and Put are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. But, okay, let's just think about this. Wait a minute. Who is Gog and Magog anyways? Many people have tried to answer this question. Some answers have been pretty good, others not so much. So top contenders for Gog and Magog have included the Russians, the Huns, the First Napoleonic War, and the Ottoman Empire. Now, of course, unfortunately, the internet is full of conspiracy theories linking Zionism to Gog and Magog. Now, after wading through all of these different theories and trying to connect the dots to see how they all work, I did feel just absolutely a bit crazy. Okay, so let's see now if we can go back to the Bible and unpack things a little bit about who Gog and Magog are or what it even is. Well, we know from Ezekiel's prophecy that he was the chief prince of Tubal and that he was from the land of Magog. We also know that his army includes, amongst other things, Persia, Cuth, and Put. But that really doesn't tell us much, because outside of this prophecy in Ezekiel that goes on in chapters 38 and 39, we don't really have any other further explicit references to Gog and Magog. And this ambiguity led the rabbis to conclude that this term isn't a reference to a specific nation or king, but instead it's a term for the ongoing war of nations against Israel. Now, while no one nation or king can lay exclusive claim to the title Gog and Magog, some nations have played key positions in the war against Israel, and one particular nation has played a really significant role. Now, if you hadn't noticed, the title of this lecture, Persia, Iran, and the War of Gog and Magog, it kind of takes my thunder away from getting to reveal to you who Gog and Magog are. This title basically tells you that. We are talking about the ancient kingdom of Persia and its modern inheritor, Iran. And another thing you might have noticed from the title of my lecture is that if Persia has been involved in the war of Gog and Magog, that we're not talking about some future war that's going to happen in the future. We're talking about a war that's going on right now and has actually been going on for a very long time now. Persia's involvement in the war of Gog and Magog was foreseen by the prophet Daniel in a vision of 4 hideous beasts. The 4 beasts, a lion with eagle's wings, a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, a 4-headed winged leopard, and a 10-horned horrifying beast thing, represent the Babylonian, Persian, Macedonian, and Roman empires, which all played significant roles in the war of Gog and Magog against the Jewish people. Yet, out of these 4 empires, the Persians have been and are currently central in Gog and Magog. Now, thanks also to the prophet Daniel, we actually know that the war between Persia and Israel is not just some physical war, but is actually a spiritual battle between the archangel Michael and the demonic prince of Persia. As the prophet Daniel tells us, the prince of Persia stood before me for 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. Then I was left alone with the king of Persia. This demonic entity that rules Persia in the spiritual realm and is fighting Michael the archangel is called Dubiel in Jewish eschatology, which means my God is a bear. Not only does Daniel give us a spiritual glimpse into this battle between Michael the archangel and the prince of Persia, Dubiel, he also tells us through a prophecy that the kingdom of Persia will return for a total of 4 times. As he says, behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. Now, Jewish tradition, it sees the first 3 kings of this vision as Cyrus, Darius, and Ahasuerus. The 4th king is a mystery. This interpretation makes sense to me. It's a good, literal interpretation of Daniel's prophecy based on a careful analysis of the historical events of his time period. However, I think we can also approach this vision maybe in a bit of a broader viewpoint that interprets this vision as pertaining to 4 Persian kingdoms. The 4 Persian kingdoms. The first 3 have come and gone. They were the Achaemenid Empire, the Parthian Empire, and the Sasanian Empire. And now I believe that we are living in the time of the 4th Persian kingdom, which is no friend of Israel. And while the geographical territory of this empire might be small compared to its predecessors, its influence, military power, and wealth are felt all over the Middle East in ways that its 3 predecessors could not have imagined. But if we look back through history, we quickly see the relationship between Persia and Israel, and even modern-day Iran and Israel, has had its ups and downs. It's not all been bad. And in fact, at times, Persia has been a great friend of Israel. One such time that Persia was a great friend of Israel was at its beginning stages. This was a good time for Israel because the rise of the Persian Empire meant the end of Jewish exile, as Cyrus the Great, the first emperor of the new Persian Empire, was used by God to bring an end to the Babylonian Empire, which destroyed the temple and exiled the Jewish people. His victory over the Babylonians ushered in a new era for the Jewish people, because not only did the Persians destroy the enemies of the Jewish people, but they actively encouraged the Jewish people to return to Zion and to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. In this stage of the war of Gog and Magog, God used Persia to bring an end to the mighty Babylonians. In fact, Cyrus and his kingdom were so integral to the return of the exiles of Zion that he is called the Lord's anointed in Isaiah. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to his Mashiach, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the belts of kings, and to open doors before him that gates may not be closed. Hashem gave Cyrus dominion over the world and great military might. And by the time of his death, he had established one of the greatest empires at that time. However, a mere 47 years after his death, the Jewish people were faced with annihilation in the kingdom of Persia at the hands of King Ahasuerus's royal advisor, Haman. Hey. I'm going to say that word a few more times. So, Haman wanted to rid Persia of its Jewish population because of one Jew, Mordecai, refusing to bow to him. Haman's desire to to rid Persia of the Jews, but yet they're fighting back, and the battles that ensued were wars in the battle of Gog and Magog. After victory over their enemies, the Jews enjoyed light, gladness, joy, and honor, and the war of Gog and Magog was quiet until another epic battle took place between the Sasanian Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire over Jerusalem. Now, during this battle, the Persians used the Jewish population to fight against the Byzantines. The commander of the Jewish forces, Nehemiah ben Hushiel, gathered an army of 26,000 men and together with the Sasanians took control of Jerusalem. The apocalyptic Jewish text Sefer Zerubbabel explicitly calls this battle the Battle of Gog and Magog. And again, Persia is central. And in a reversal of expectations, the Persians fought alongside the Jewish people, not against them for Jerusalem. However, unfortunately, the intentions of the Persians were not entirely pure or innocent, and they used any means necessary to capture Jerusalem, including massacring without discrimination some 60,000 of its residents. Now, after the dust settled and the Sasanians did not return sovereignty to the Jewish people, and in fact, just a few years after the battle, they removed all Jews from Jerusalem and forbade them from entering the city. And a few decades later, the Sasanian Empire fell to the Rashidun Caliphate in what was understood again by the Jewish community at the time to be another war or battle in the war of Gog and Magog. And this time Persia was central, however, they were not victorious. The fall of the Sasanian Empire marked the end of the third Persian kingdom foreseen by Daniel the prophet. And it was the beginning of a time when Islam would subject the entire Middle East, North Africa, and Southern Europe to its cruelty. For centuries, the Jewish people wandered from country to country and were exiled from their homeland, and so the UN voted to partition Palestine in 1947. Now, Iran's vote against the partitioning of Palestine had more to do with trying to keep internal Islamic extremists at home quiet than representing some type of government anti-Israel stance. We know this because soon after the UN voted, then Iranian dictator Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi began working with Israel to create an official alliance between the two countries. He saw Israel as a natural ally for Iran that could stand together with him and the United States in the Middle East against, at the time, communist strongholds in Egypt and Syria. Iranian recognition of Israel was made official on March 6, 1950, when Iranian ambassador to UN Nasrallah Enzam informed then Israeli UN ambassador Abba Eban that Iran saw Israel as a legitimate nation and a partner in the Middle East. By 1953, a trading company was established between Iran and Israel to encourage strong economic ties between the two countries. This friendship, however, was not welcomed by all in Iran. Islamic fundamentalists in Iran capitalized on the anti-Shah political movements in Iran to stir up the people against him by casting themselves as members of the global Marxist movements against oppressive regimes. Now, while the Islamists were very much opposed to the atheistic agenda of the Marxists, they loved the anti-Zionistic agenda of the Marxists, and they utilized this anti-Zionistic agenda as a way to advance their desire to overthrow the Shah. The Ayatollahs twisted the minds of the Iranian people into believing, thanks to the propaganda tools they learned from the Soviets, that the Zionists were behind the dictatorship of the Shah as part of their larger global conspiracy. The Islamists did a great job creating a victim narrative in the minds of the Iranian people, and by 1963, all-out anti-Israel propaganda could be heard in the inflammatory speeches of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, in which he would emphatically declare, Israel wishes to seize your economy, to destroy your trade and agriculture. It does not wish the Quran or any learned man to exist in this country. These ideas became ingrained into the psyche of the Iranian people and helped foster anger against Israel as the supposed boogeyman behind the Shah's totalitarian policies. This anger eventually led to the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when Khomeini and his allies overthrew the Shah, and by doing so, turned Iran into a fascist Islamic dictatorship that now had one goal: destroy the Jewish state. Once diplomatic relations between Iran and Israel collapsed, a new alliance was needed, and it was forged between the new Islamic Republic of Iran and Yasser Arafat's terrorist organization, the PLO. The arch-terrorist Yasser Arafat was the first foreign leader to visit Tehran after the Islamic Revolution. His visit to Iran was unannounced, and as his plane came into Iranian airspace, he was surrounded by fighter jets which threatened to shoot him down. However, once he took off his head covering, they recognized him instantly, and they gave him safe passage to Tehran's Merakhabad airport. Upon meeting the Iranian delegation at the airport, Arafat declared the Iranian Revolution was a major revolution and an important victory for Palestine. Upon hearing this statement, the Iranians began dancing and chanting, "Today Iran, tomorrow Palestine." 2 days later, Arafat arrived at the former Israeli consulate in Tehran and declared it the new Palestinian consulate to Iran. Arafat declared this as his first victory over Israel and the first piece of Israeli real estate which he took back for the Palestinians. Now, like the guerrilla factions in the early days of the Iranian Islamic Revolution, which were influenced by far-left Marxist militia groups, Yasser Arafat was actually also trained by the KGB. He was trained to present himself as a noble statesman who cared about peace and diplomatic solutions to conflicts. However, this was part of an elaborate plan to hide his true bloodthirsty genocidal tendencies. Not only was Iran forging a new alliance with the PLO and its psychopathic, barbaric leader against Israel, but they were also, thanks to Arafat, learning new ways to wage a propaganda war against Israel on the world stage. Now, thanks to this propaganda war, Iranian encouraged Palestinian terrorism against Israel was and continues to be justified as a means to end a brutal occupation against stolen Palestinian lands. And by the 1990s, this desire for the extinction of Israel was evident in near daily Palestinian terrorist attacks encouraged by Iran, the deadliest of which were the suicide bombings of the Second Intifada, which were responsible for the deaths of some 1,300 Israelis. Now, from the end of the Second Intifada in 2005 to the present, Iran has positioned dozens of military proxies across the Middle East, which are a constant threat to Israel's existence. From Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza and Syria, to the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and several other terrorist proxies in Iraq and Bahrain, such as Kataib Sahad al-Shuhada and al-Ashtar brigades. At this point, Iranian influence in the Middle East is undeniable, and their military might is a force to be reckoned with. Whether the Iranian government realizes it or not, they are currently leading the nations in the war of Gog and Magog against Israel. The prophet Daniel foresaw the power of the great Persian bear and how 4 manifestations of Iran would take place. The first 3 Persian kingdoms have come and gone, and now we're living in the time of the 4th Persian kingdom. All of this it's bleak And honestly, it's hard to feel that there's any hope for the situation between Iran and Israel. But as disciples of Yeshua, we are called to pray for all mankind. And our love ethic charges us to believe in the possibility of all things and to hope for the good of all things and to endure all things. And the situation between Iran and Israel is no different. What we need to understand is this: the schemes of Iran against the state of Israel, through its proxies and Palestinian terrorism, are all, yes, elements of the great war of Gog and Magog against the Jewish people. But really, in a larger way, they're all just a smokescreen used by Satan to distract away from his ultimate end goal of this war, the destruction of God's kingdom, the destruction of his malchut, which means the destruction of God's people, and if possible, chas v'shalom, the destruction of God himself. But Iran is really just a pawn. It's just a pawn in the hands of the devil. Iran means nothing to him. He is cruel and wicked, and he has brutalized the Iranian people for decades now under an oppressive Islamic regime. Yet history has shown us that the Persians can be a friend of the Jewish people, that they can rise to the occasion and be a great ally of the Jewish state, a nation which at one time actively aided the Jewish people in rebuilding the temple and returning their exiles, and stood with them as a powerful ally in the Middle East. Yet Iran has also persecuted the Jewish people and even brought them to the point of annihilation. And this back and forth also shows us that the war of Gog and Magog, while yes, being a war of the nations against Israel, is also in a way a conflict within the nations themselves over whether or not they will stand with Israel and God's kingdom or fight against it to set up their own opposing kingdoms. Unfortunately, right now, in the war of Gog and Magog, the current relationship between Israel and Iran is bleak. Right now, at this stage of the war of Gog and Magog, Iran is not a friend of Israel. Every terrorist attack on Israel from Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthim, proxies of Iran, are outworkings of the same wicked spirit that possessed Haman to annihilate the Jewish people in the days of Queen Esther and Mordecai. But it doesn't have to be this way. While we cannot wage a war in the physical realm against Iran, every one of us here can fight in the spiritual realm. Our weapon is a prayer. The prayers of the righteous are a powerful weapon against the schemes of the enemy. Right now, our prayers for Israel during this critical time are like arrows in the hands of Michael in his fight against the prince of Persia, who is strangling a nation of 87.9 million people under an oppressive regime to conduct his plans against Israel. As members of God's kingdom, we can pray fervently for the success of Israel and her victory in battle, while also praying fervently for the freedom of the people of Iran as a nation with deep and wonderful history. We can pray that God will strengthen the underground church in Iran and that the little over 9,000 Jews who live there would be protected. We can pray that the soul of the Iranian people would be awakened in strength and wisdom and courage and come to know Yeshua as the Messiah, and in so doing overthrow the Islamic regime and once more become a friend of the Jewish people. Our prayers matter and they are powerful. The war of Gog and Magog is not over, but the time for the nations to gather against Israel in this final battle is quickly approaching. The enemy is gathering his forces against God's people. But there is hope because the forces of the light side, of the good side, are also gathering. History has shown us that there is hope for Israel, and there's also hope for the repentance of the nations. And you in this room are also proof too that the nations can and do gather together alongside Israel in her war. Am Israel Chai.